Hey there, students. It is Wednesday, and I wanted to just make a super quick video, and I promise it will be quick, showing you an example of what some of your annotation and summary work might look like um, for the assignment that's due, which will be extended a little bit because of Martin Luther King Day. So I'm going to be adjusting that due date because we shouldn't have anything due on a holiday. That is hopefully a day on for us, right, to work in our communities to help make them better rather than a day off. But let me just show you what that looks like so you have an idea. Um, and also, I want to discuss kind of the time that it took me to do this. So, okay, so in our course, right, one of our longest section of reading is the Epic of Gilgamesh, this narrative epic poem, this interesting story told in verse here across numerous tablets that have been found and then translated for us. So this is what my um, summary writing and annotation work looked like. So I just ended up, I kind of made some notes about the beginning, kind of the general setting of when Gilgamesh was written and when that story was circulating and how it kind of developed over time and how it was used. And then I just started to write down these page numbers, and you can see after about every two pages, and I'm always looking down here at like here's like A144. I'm looking at those pages, and after a couple pages, sometimes after two, sometimes after one, sometimes after five or four, um, I'm just writing a couple of notes. And usually, what I'm doing is I'm kind of noting down the summary piece here, like, hey, here's in general what's happening in the story, in this narrative. And then here are some of my thoughts and questions that I'm adding to this. And I'm not always adding these additional thoughts and questions, but whenever we go back to how you're going to be graded, right? Module one assignment, and ignore these unpublished things. Where in my view, I'm having us read the Epic of Gilgamesh rather than the Iliad, the Odyssey, which many of us have often read before, but many of us have not read Gilgamesh, so I didn't have these selected. If you have extra time to read and you want to read these, you can see that these were some other options that I might have used and chose Gilgamesh instead as the core reading for this week. But anyways, this annotating the text piece, right? You're going to be uploading, some of your notes and things like that. And doing something like this would meet a lot of those goals. And this is how I'm doing it. Now, I showed you how to, add notes and things like this and different markings to help you annotate if you like to do it more on this screen. If that's how you are doing it, that's fine. You can just take screenshots of that and so on to help push it forward. But you can see here that this took me a few pages. And if I'm using Google Docs, I can do a file download as a Microsoft Word document in order to um, submit the file type for this assignment. Okay. And I want to note how long it took me to move through and do this. And this will be the last piece that I want to share with you today. Um, it took me, okay, let me stop sharing. It took me about 2 hours to read through and to pause and make some notes, summarizing what was happening in the story and adding some of my own thoughts to complete that. So if you haven't started to work on this yet, you can expect that's going to take you about 2 hours to move through and to take sufficient notes that are summarizing, asking questions, engaging with the text. And I haven't yet done some just like final reflection writing, like writing a couple sentences, a paragraph, just trying to work to kind of gather all my thoughts and engage with the text further, which would take another 5 minutes or so. So the way that I broke those 2 hours up is I used the Pomodoro method. And so what that means is that you effectively set a 25-minute timer. For me, I just used my phone, set a 25-minute timer. And for those 25 minutes, I would just focus on reading the Epic of Gilgamesh and making some notes. And the timer goes off, and then you're supposed to take a 5-minute break. So what I would do is I would stand up, go get a glass of water, use the bathroom, walk around, what have you, and then I would jump back in for another 25 minutes of focused work. That's the Pomodoro method to help you focus and to stay energized whenever you're working on something that will take, an hour, 2, 3 hours to do. It's difficult to just sit there and focus for an hour, focus for 2 hours. Our brains just oftentimes can't handle that. But if we can break it up this way, the Pomodoro method works really, really great for me. And it's just a study strategy and work strategy I want to share with you. This afternoon, actually this morning. And it's 11 now. I've actually got to jump into a meeting at 11. So those are my tips for you. And that's how I'd encourage you to continue to work through. I ended up doing that reading over 2 days. I read an hour yesterday, effectively 50 minutes with 2 5-minute breaks, and then an hour today, 50 minutes, 2 5-minute breaks, um, and then made this quick video for you. So thanks for your time, everybody. Good luck with your work this week. Watch for, an update of just the due date for work that was going to be due on Monday, and I will check in with you soon.